Today I'm speaking with Ricky Johnson and Austin Johnson. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hey, happy to be here, Tim.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So glad we got to do this. We've been hoping to do this for a while now, and it's great to have two people. It's not too often that I have two guests at the same time, so it's kind of fun to do it a little tag team here and see how the interactions go. In terms of the bios for Ricky and Austin, I'm going to go first with Ricky. They both live in Michigan. Ricky lives in Upper Peninsula, Michigan, and he has one son and two daughters. And he's a writer doing technical publications, and he's also a weightlifter. And before we go to Austin, Ricky, could you tell us anything more besides that bio about what you're up to these days?
Well, besides working a full-time job, I've pretty much always had some kind of side hustle because I have a lot of energy. I don't know if it's ADD or just energy, but I've I've owned a screen printing business before for about 5 years, and I sold that. Currently, like I have a candle business that my wife and I run, and we're in maybe a dozen or more retail shops. And years ago too, I did sideline drywall work for probably a good decade on the side while we're also working full time. So I was lacking sleep for a couple decades, but now I was trying to, wind down a little bit and work a little less and try to enjoy free time a little more. So
Hmm. It sounds like you're a busy man.
yeah,
It's
always
good though.
busy.
It's
Yeah,
good to have irons in the fire.
yeah.
And Austin is also married. He's also in Michigan, not too far away from his parents. He has two stepchildren, and he's been working as a visiting professor in teaching in the area of biological science, which I know we'll get to shortly. He's also a weightlifter. Besides that, Austin, what else can we know about you?
Well, I've been a skateboarder my whole life, so I did that since I was a little kid. I'm 29 years old now. I can still shred pretty good, so I try to stay at it, stay active. So I love to exercise and uh do things to keep both my mind and my body sharp. I like to hike and take walks. And ID species, things like that. So it's really fun to take walks through a lot of the different hiking trails and things like that we have in the area and see what type of wildlife and plants we can identify and things like that.
Hmm, that's awesome. You remind me when I was younger and I was in high school, I had this chemistry and biology teacher, and he and his wife had young children at the time. And I remember taking a walk with them once at a park, and these little 5 and 6, 7 year olds could say like all the species of the different um, plants and trees, and even like in the Latin names. I was like, wow, they're hardcore. They like this stuff. That's awesome. Well, what we're going to do is we're going to start with Ricky for your story, and of course, since Austin's here and he can jump in with questions and comments too. So we'll, Austin, you and I will kind of be co-interviewing Ricky, and then Ricky will do the same thing with Austin. So feel free to jump in and hit off each other with different comments. But Ricky, we're going to start with you, and we'd love to hear your story.
All right. Well, I was born and raised here in the Upper Peninsula, Michigan, and my mother was, born and raised in a very strict religion called Laestadianism. And my father, who was actually from like Chicago area, when he went to college in northern Wisconsin, there was one of the churches was there, and he had met somebody from the church there and started going to that church, and eventually met my mother. And then he moved to here up here to the Upper Peninsula, Michigan, and like from a really, let's say, early age, I pretty much felt like we're going to church, and there's very like strict fundamentalism. There was music was preached to be a sin. No TV, women wear dresses. Like the elders in the church said there's never a reason ever that a woman shouldn't have a dress. She should never wear pants. I mean, she shouldn't have a dress on. She shouldn't wear pants at all and stuff. And like the women aren't supposed to cut their hair, or they preach things that were like disobedience, like preach things about women shouldn't be wearing like open-toed shoes to church, or like social media. A Christian shouldn't have social media, things like that. Which some of those things they would say not a sin, but it's disobedience type of stuff. And
What was
like
the name of that religion again?
it's
Lestadianism?
this Laestadianism. I don't know if you want to start going to that now, a little more detail of that, or
I just want to make sure I heard it correctly. But is it a version of Christianity?
yeah, it's
Okay.
yeah. Laestadius was a preacher in northern Sweden who had a spiritual awakening in the 1840s, and then Laestadianism was born out of that.
Hmm. I've heard a
So
lot of different groups and subgroups. That's the first time I've heard of that one. That's interesting.
yeah, not a lot of people have heard about it, and it's well, we'll talk about it later, but there's been a lot of splits and stuff like that over time. So there's Laestadian churches like all over world in different areas and stuff like that. So, but growing up in that religion, even from a young age, I never felt like I belonged in there, but I was always trying to, what I say, maybe figure it out or understand. These people that seem to really believe it, they they were fervent believers, and yet for some reason with me, even as a young age, I felt like there's a disconnect there. Like, I don't know if I could see like logical fallacies and things they were saying or what it was, but I was trying very hard for 40 years to believe this or figure this out. So anyway, going through school, um, elementary school, like we're not supposed to play sports or anything, but like in elementary school in fifth and sixth grade, my parents let me join the basketball team at the school, which I enjoyed. So we practiced during the weekdays and Saturday was game day. And I enjoyed that. But then, I got to junior high school, wasn't on sports at all. It was like when I was doing elementary school, it was kind of nobody really knew about it. But in high school, they didn't want people to know that, well, they didn't believe you should be playing it anyway. My dad was always kind of a sports nut, but since the church preached that, sports and all that stuff shouldn't be involved in it as a sin, he battled that as like, because you always pay attention to sports, but then you also feel bad about paying attention to sports, so then you repent of it, and it's just a vicious cycle of,
Hmm.
you know.
Do you have any
So
idea why they labeled sports as a sin?
there's a variety of things, like, well, for one is you could injure your body, which you should, want to have your body in good shape, and you have to provide for a family and all that stuff someday. Also concerned about you getting a little too high on yourself, like if you're good at sports, creating a sort of god of yourself, because you're proud of what you've done, and you might get a little, the ego from that and stuff. Plus you'd also be um have camaraderie with the world, and you'd be involving with the worldly people, and they wouldn't want that either. So there's a variety of reasons like that.
Hmm.
And sorry to cut you off, but
No,
also you might watch sports as well, and then you get so into watching sports that it becomes over God, and then that's also not supposed to happen as well.
yeah,
Hmm.
and you could put athletes on a pedestal, and yeah, sports could become more important to you than going to church on a Sunday, and stuff like that. So
It's interesting though that and I've seen this before, so this isn't like a total shocker, but what they're doing is they're taking a philosophy that's very general, such as don't put anything above God or take care of your body. And then they're saying, but there's an application that, it could be very simple, like, one person decides not to play sports, the other person does. They're both in their minds deciding before God how they want to best live out this principle. Maybe one person feels like it actually does glorify God because they're exercising so much and truly delighting in their body and saying, God, thank you for this body so much. And the other person says, if I want to thank God for my body, I'm not going to do it that way. But they're taking a general principle, applying it, but then saying the application has to be the same for everybody, which is it comes out in so many different subcultures of Christianity so differently. But it's amazing to me when you hear where they like literally say this is a sin, such as watching TV on Sundays or something, whatever it was. Or in my circles, a lot of it was like playing cards or dancing, watching a movie that's ever been rated R, even PG-13 probably. Just like, but they say it's not like it's a freedom thing; it's an actual sin, which is really, it's amazing how much they want to take away your freedom of, autonomy.
yeah, and exactly, and even when it comes to plays, things like that, even at school plays and stuff like that, they always try to make it like you got to be one-minded. So like the church, they want everybody to be like that one-mindedness, as they call it, which I mean we get into later too, but that's an impossibility. I think everybody pretty much creates their own religion. Everybody makes little allowances here and there. So sometimes when they say there's like 43,000 Christian religions, I think it was probably like 2 billion different Christian religions, because everybody's got a little bit of thing that's their thing. But
Yeah, really creates a culture too where you end up feeling like if you fit those rules right, like you do it, at least externally, you're somehow a good person. And it's so crazy the facade that it can create for a lot of people, as well as
yeah.
OCD, like the OCD mentality, like I've gotta
Oh
do all
yes,
these things.
yeah. I've seen a lot of people that have, yeah. You can see definitely major religious OCD, where it's detrimental to their life, but they don't realize it. And they still don't realize it. They're still every day they're just trying so hard to be something that it's like you can never be that perfect person, and so they anguish over it. Obviously, people just anguish, and it's sad. Anyway, back
Mm.
to the school stuff with the sports. Like I mean, I love sports. I love playing sports. I would have loved to have. I mean, football would have been my thing. Football or mixed martial arts. I mean, I would have been all over that if I was allowed to. So then it's like in junior high, not allowed to be in sports. I get to into high school, and like in gym class, running and pull-ups and all that stuff, I could compete or do better than most of the people that were like in track and stuff like that. So I think it was around my junior year of high school. Our track coach, actually, he took my dad out to lunch to talk to him to see if he could get me into track, because he noticed that I was a fast runner and I could do the most pull-ups in gym class and stuff. And in this odd mixed message, my dad talks to me one day. He's like, "Well, if you want to, you can join track." And I was like, "Wow, like, this isn't gonna go well. He's gonna get a lot of scrutiny for this." And so would my mom. But I regret this at the time. I'm like, I'm not gonna run for fun. Like, I would want to run to play sports. Like, I would have played basketball, football, hockey, but track just didn't really interest me. Now looking back, is like I wish I'd taken the opportunity, because I probably could have used that to segue into one of those sports. Because I'm already in this, maybe I could go into football. And like the weightlifting facility was next to the high school football field. So I'd go there after school and weightlift with all the football players. Then they'd get to go out and do practice and all that stuff. And then I just have to go home. And it's just always bummed me out, because like I would love to participate. That would have been so fun.
Mm.
And I mean, looking back, I'm surprised I didn't just forge a note and just say my parents that I could play, and then just get busted at some point, because I had done it before. Like I'd been, when I was representative for one of the type of homecoming things that they have there. We're not supposed to do things like that. And, I went up on stage and was dressed up, was a girl dressed up nice on my arm and stuff like that. But then I didn't participate in the dance later that evening, because dances were a sin and stuff. And so it's like, I'm kind of walking these two worlds all through high school. It's like you're fighting your natural inclination of what your thing is or what you love. And it always made me feel. I also felt like like I said, I didn't fit in with the church, but like you feel alone. Like you can't even share these thoughts really with other people, because you're just gonna get rebuked, and they're gonna, they're gonna have the black and white thinking. They're not gonna. There's like, no, this is not a possibility. You can't do this.
Mm.
So I pretty much just, like, even through elementary school, through high school, I was just kind of off in my own world for the most part, just very insular, thinking a lot. But on the other half of your brain, you're also trying so hard to say, why can't I just be like I see these other older people at church that seem like they're really striving and really, you know, what you think is perfect. Well, then when I got older, you learn about different things that have happened with people at church and things they've been through, and it's like, oh, everybody's got their problem and issue. You put these older pious Christians on a pedestal, and then when you learn sometimes some shocking things, like, oh, we're all human and we all have flaws, and here I'm trying to be like them, and you find out it's a false facade. I mean, they're human too.
Yeah. Can I go back just a few steps in terms of your exposure and experience at that church? Were you, by the way, what was the official name of the church?
The church we were in was called the Old Apostolic Lutheran Church.
Okay.
And with the like Laestadianism, with all the splits, there's like the First Apostolic Lutheran Church, there's the Laestadian Lutheran Church, there's just many different iterations of it.
Okay.
Some have Luther in the title, some just have Laestadius in the title. Like ours was like when they first came to the U.S. with immigrants. At some point, there around 1900s, there was a schism, and then like one kicked half the group out, so they started a church just a couple blocks down the road. And as typical with all those new funny religions, they just keep splitting and splitting as different charismatic men get different ideas, and then you get a handful of people joining, you got another split and stuff like that. So.
Yeah, exactly. Well, what I wanted to ask too about is in terms of not just the rules of the church, but just the general context of Christianity, what was it like hearing about the actual core of, like, what did it mean to you to be a Christian? Were you invited to do anything as a young child or young man? What did it mean to have a relationship with God? What was that part of it about?
Well, what the church does, like when you have basically believe that Jesus gave the apostles the ability to forgive sins, which also is passed on to the Christians. So they believe, true Christians can forgive the sins of people. So like at the church, when they'll have a movement a lot of times it happens like at the end of the sermon, a movement where congregation is hugging each other and asking forgiveness from other Christians who will testify that their sins are forgiven.
Hmm.
So that was another thing too, is always difficult for me because you see people weeping and really emotional, and I mean, obviously my nature, my illogical side is much stronger than my emotional side. And you feel like guilty because it's like, yeah, I feel bad about things I've done this week, and there's things that I do. If I lost my temper or whatever, I might ask forgiveness for it, which you feel is necessary because you wouldn't want to die in that state of having the sin on your conscience. And so, but I also felt like I'm not doing enough because I'm not breaking down and weeping. And some people are crying, like shedding tears in just loud, high pitched voice, confessing their sins to another Christian. And this is like hundreds of people doing this at one time. And I'd be more sorry, I lost my temper this week, and can you forgive me for this or whatever. And I always feel like I'm not doing enough. You always feel like you got to do a little more. Like, how come I don't feel that? Like I'm really just breaking down and stuff like that. And like I said,
Hmm.
it must be because my brain is more logical than emotional. So it's just like, this is what I did, A, B, C, and D. Can you forgive me, type of thing.
Yeah. What was the
So
role of the cross, like the death and resurrection of Christ? What part did that play in the story for you personally? Like, were you? I mean, it sounds like, if I had to guess, just from what I know so far, that they lean more towards a work salvation kind of mentality. But would you say that that's true, or that they truly just did preach simple faith in Christ's death and resurrection is
So,
sufficient?
yeah, they would say that like good works and all that stuff isn't going to help you get to heaven. It's more about, you have this relationship with Jesus. You confess your sins. You get your sins forgiven. So like good works and charity, they're like, they'll do internal, like helping people or I don't even know how much they help people within the church. Like I don't believe much monetary wise or whatever, but it's more like taking care of inside in the house, type of stuff. But when it comes to like good works and stuff, um, it's almost like some people are hesitant to really do charity and stuff like that because they don't want to get accused by other people within that social structure of, oh, you're trying to earn your way into heaven by doing these good works and stuff. And a couple of stories related to that. Well, actually, before we get into that, there's one thing I want to touch on before I forget about too. When you mention rules, preachers make sure all the time to say we do not have rules. Like there's no rules in the Christianity. You don't want to do things that would hurt Jesus. But anybody who knows anything about psychology, even just a little bit in psychology, knows that within that social group, those are unwritten rules because you don't want to break those rules and have members of the church see you. So it's like their rules are just not set in stone on a tablet. So to try and say, well, there are no rules in the Christianity, it's like, no, most people nod their head and yeah, okay, yeah, I believe that there's no rules here, really. We just want to don't want to hurt Jesus and pound those. I hear a lot about pounding those nails into his hands, when you sin and stuff like that, and or
Hmm.
making Jesus hurt or making him, sad and stuff.
Would
Which
they would they do church discipline, or was it just more just like a cultural thing, like you just weren't seen as holy enough and serious enough?
Yeah, I heard people judged quite often for like, yeah, they don't really, we don't know them from the heart and stuff like that. And for consequences, it'd be like if you're doing something like, let's say you were at a place you shouldn't be. Let's say somebody decided to go in the movie theater or something like that, which is wrong. They might say like, I mean, somebody may rebuke you. They may come up to you and say, I saw you doing this, and we shouldn't be there. And it's a bad example for the Christians. It's a bad example for the world to see somebody from our church going to the movies and stuff like that. If you don't get much reaction on that, they may go talk to a preacher, and then a lot of times you might get dragged to a preacher. Like if somebody has a issue with you over something else, they would say, "Let's go talk to the preacher," and the preacher would, be the intermediary. But actually, they would say God's advice is coming through the preacher. So whatever the advice is basically God telling you this. This is the way it should be, type of thing.
Hmm.
And so, oh, here, hold on for a second. Well, we should go back to what did you ask me again?
I was just talking
Going
about
off a little tangent.
the death and resurrection of Christ. Like, what did it mean to you in terms of to be truly saved? Like, when is getting to the point of when did you actually place your faith in Christ? Like, what was the actual moment where you trusted Jesus for the first time officially? That's what I was kind of aiming for.
Okay. I would say that, I mean, identified as a Christian. I would, you obviously feel guilty when you do something that's wrong. Um, I would, I try to have a relationship with Jesus, and I pray and stuff like that as a little child, and like in the church, it really pound away like the fear of hell in this in the some of the depictions like from Laestadius' writings, which they'll read a Laestadius sermon, an old Laestadius sermon every Sunday, and then they'll sing a song, and then after that they'll follow up with a preacher they'll take a little spot out of the Bible, and the preacher will preach according to that. But they'll read a Laestadius sermon every single Sunday, and Laestadius it's very very there's a lot of, or it's what I call maybe a law sermon in there, like especially against drunkenness or drunkards, because when he started out, there was a lot of drinking in that northern Sweden where he was at, a lot of drunks and stuff like that in there. So a lot of his sermons are really pounding on drinkers and drunkenness and whiskey merchants and all this other stuff, which is kind of funny to me today when I think about it now, because it's like now they still read those every Sunday, but yet nobody in the congregation really drinks. I mean, I shouldn't say nobody. There are a few people that obviously do and are try to hide it from people, and obviously a lot of them feel guilty about it too. But it's like they're coming to church on Sunday, but then they may drink. But I'd say there's only probably a handful of people, and they try to hide it. I mean, there's awkward times where I went to pick up a pizza at a bar and saw somebody from church there, and they look like they're they're freaked out that I saw them and stuff. But so
Hmm.
you're sitting there listening to sermons about drunkenness, and I'm thinking you're preaching to a bunch of people that don't drink. So it's like you're hammering away on this stuff, but what they're what it was is just this ratchet up Laestadius sermons that are making people really fear hell. But then also he'd talk about a lot about the joy of forgiveness of sins. But even the joy, he even criticized, like, if you should have this joy over the forgiveness of sins, but like this joy should never turn to laughter and stuff like that. Because then when if you get in any type of laughter, that you might get light-minded, and when you're light-minded, the devil may come in and stuff. So there's all like these mental gymnastics you gotta try to do to try to hit that sweet spot. So as a
Hmm.
child, I'm trying to I mean, as I said before, understand this, like to get this proper understanding. Like, I mean, I understand what they're saying, but I'm not getting that, like I said, that feeling that I think I should have as compared to what I see other people outwardly show. Or when you're in a group of people and you're visiting, and some of the things they say, there's some things that I wouldn't really agree with, but I think, oh, I shouldn't think that. I shouldn't internally disagree with them. Outwardly I never would, because I mean, simple in-group outreach psychology, which I didn't know at the time, but enough common sense to say, okay, if I were to object to what they just said, they're not going to want to be around me. They're consider me dangerous, stuff like that. So there's so many things I heard from an early age all the way up into adulthood that would make me cringe or make me just not feel good. I'm like, there's a lot of cruel judgment things. Or when I talk about like criticizing good work stuff, one time before church, I'm sitting there visiting with 5 other guys. 2 of them were actually preachers, and we're just talking. And I remembered a story that a guy from work had told me, because he went over to do a missionary work, different religion, went over to a missionary work in Africa. And he was just sharing some stories about what he experienced in Africa. And they were really interesting stories. And got brought up in conversation with these guys. I'm kind of sharing the stories that this guy shared with me at work that week. And which I thought were, this is lighthearted, just telling little stories. And they started kind of snickering at me, and like one of the preachers kind of sneered at me and smirked, like mocking this guy, going, "What's he going to do? Does he think he's going to buy his way into heaven, by doing all these good works?" And that made me feel sick in my stomach. And I actually I looked right at him and I said, "I cannot tell you what was in his heart. No clue. Here he is judging and mocking this guy for going to help these people in Africa." And the guy was a genuine nice guy. So I'm like, how am I going to sit there and judge and say, "Oh, he's doing this to get to heaven. He's trying to build his Tower of Babel to heaven, or ladder to heaven." No, he was just doing what he felt was the right thing to do. So things like that, made me feel sick. Or when I when there's nice people, what they call worldly people outside the church that other people may know, when these people have passed away, it's, say kind of that passive aggressive stuff like, well, I wonder what they're thinking now, or maybe this person, like my dad wasn't originally from the church, so like when my grandma, her son goes off to college, and she said, oh, he goes off to college and he joins this cult. So my grandma was always critical of the religion, and even after she died, I heard other people say about her, like, well, I wonder what she's thinking now, like she was critical of this church her son joined, and they're saying this passive aggressive way, like, well, she's burning in hell now, so I wonder what she's thinking now. Stuff like that would make me sick. It's like, and then they also say, well, we can't really judge, and I'm like, well, you don't make any sense here. You say you're the one true saving faith, you don't really judge, but then people don't believe in that faith. Where do they go? To hell, in their mind. So it's like, you are judging. I brought this up with, talked to people about it and family members and stuff, and it's like, it's so interesting, like how they can't. You're saying we don't judge, and meanwhile you're judging everybody. You're trying to, and to do those mental gymnastics. I would have done that at the time too, before I worked my way out of the religion, is just justify that. Well, we can't really say, but we also that but in there.
Yeah, I heard a
So,
lot of that stuff too when Christopher Hitchens died that week. A lot of people were talking like that.
oh, I'm sure
he
yeah,
worships God now, or he's bowing his knee
yeah,
now.
yeah,
But
exactly.
I do want to go back just for a second though to clarify a couple things. The idea of the cross, the death and resurrection of Christ. When we look at that as Christians, first from a historical perspective of he actually did it, but then from the salvific perspective of this was for us. And in terms of the courts of heaven, looking at your bad deeds that do deserve punishment, and God's justice needing to be kept preserved, and for the wrath of God to be poured out on sin, he can't just forgive in that equation. He has to actually pour out his wrath on somebody. And so when you're looking at the cross, you're looking at, God poured out his wrath on Jesus, his son, and that, Jesus said, why have you forsaken me? God forsakes him very temporarily. Jesus is taking all of our punishment. And then he, of course, actually dies and then rises again in the story. And in the Christian theology, the idea is that when you place yourself in the sense of the identity, like identify with Christ's death and resurrection, I understand that it was for my sins. He was in my place. In a certain sense, even though you might want to still live your life as a Christian that's very grateful for what God has done, and certainly to live a holy life to please the Lord, to be a good example, to not be worldly. But in the sense of just the actual courts of heaven, making banging the gavel down and saying, you're justified. You are made righteous in my sight. That one-time declaration occurs at the moment of your salvation. So I guess my question is, even though you wanted to do things to please the Lord, was there a time where you just said a prayer, I assume either with friends or family, or just to yourself, but just where you said, God, I understand, two simple things. I am a terrible sinner. You're a wonderful savior. I accept your free gift. And to truly at that point get saved, to say, I'm not my own anymore. I'm God's. God's been inviting me all this time. I've been like the prodigal son. He's been inviting me back home, and I will accept it. I'm coming back home now to the gospel, to the free gift of Christ through salvation. Was there a time where you just said that kind of prayer and said, God, I accept it. I understand it's not by my works that I get to heaven, but by what you did through Christ's perfect work on the cross? When did that occur?
I would say there are probably times that I would think that, but that feeling wouldn't last long. I mean,
Okay.
not at all, because I'd always feel like, well, I'm still a wretched sinner. I'm still not doing enough. I need to clean this up in my life. I need to clean that up in my life. And I mean, the preachers would say, like, you don't have to sit there and worry about trying to clean up these things. Like, you just, like you said, just freely come, feel that sorrow over sin, and then feel over joy over forgiveness, which would be like asking forgiveness from, one of the people within one of the true believers, stuff,
So it
So
sounds like you didn't really feel like you were able to rest in your salvation. Would that be fair to say?
there was never a time I was able to. No, I mean,
Hmm.
all the way up until my 40s, I don't think there was never a time where I felt. And when I'm talking about, if I had ever had that feeling, like, you know, it would probably last minutes. I mean, I wouldn't say even hours or days. It would be minutes where it instantly pivot in my mind. Like I've been pounded so much from as soon as I could understand the English language of preachers of how what a wretched sinner you are, and how you're just, you know, this terrible person, and you just, you know, Jesus has done this for you and you need to repent, you know. So the thing is with stuff like that, it's like you're, even after you repent, within seconds you're already sinning with, you know, like a lot of times talk about, you know, evil thoughts, lusts, and desires. And I mean, you can't go more than a few seconds without thinking about things like sex or stuff like that. So already you're feeling that guilt and shame, or you get angry or whatever, you know. So it's like
Hmm.
it was a constant torture in my mind. I shouldn't say constant torture in my mind. It was it was more like, you know, I might have days or weeks or months where I'm feeling just really depressed and like I'm just a terrible person. I'm never gonna get this. I'm never like I'm there's no way I'm gonna make it to heaven. I'm going to hell, you know? And then I try to work my way into being a good Christian, but it wouldn't last long. I mean, it would, you know, sometimes it might be maybe a day or two where I'm trying to like, okay, I gotta, you know, push off these things to the side that I are part of my natural inclination, things I like music, sports, science fiction. I was, when I was a little kid, I was this big science fiction nerd and stuff like that, which is things you're not supposed to be interested in. So it was like you're
Hmm.
always trying to do this balancing act where it's like, okay, I want to get to heaven and I gotta put this stuff to the side, but it's like that's me. Like how you're just always bad, which everybody has their battle with this stuff. But I just in my mind, I figured I'm never gonna make it here. And even when I was in my probably early 20s, I didn't go to church for about a year and a half in my early 20s, but I always felt like I was gonna go back at some point, you know. And especially I felt guilty because I had young when the young kids started coming along, I'm like, well, I'm probably never gonna get to heaven, but I gotta give them their opportunity at least. So, you know, I stayed in the church for 20 something years thinking, well, I probably ain't gonna make it, but at least the kids will have a chance. I'll give them their fighting chance, you know.
Hmm.
So
So did you fear a burning hell then, like a literal hell?
yeah, literal hell, which I mean we can get that later too, but once I started examining the history of this man-made construct of hell, which is funny because I get in my 40s and I'm still in this, you know, I'm in this Laestadian church where I never felt like I was a part of a square peg in a round hole type of thing. And then as I started to question all these things and started learning about history of Christianity, all this other stuff, it actually led me for, you know, once I left the church, I probably went a good year where I still would have said I was a Christian. But I was looking through my writings, the stuff I write this morning. I got a big stack of writings, which probably someday I'd like to write a book or something or a blog or whatever. But it was interesting to see how I left this super strict church. I went to a different church for about a year, and how my writing changed. Whereas I'm writing about, I'm finding things in the Bible and history of Christianity don't match up with Laestadianism. And as my writing goes along, I see more and more how I could find things critical and problematic with religion in general and Christianity, and to work my way all the way over to where I would, you know, say as agnostic or something like that. So it's interesting to see how you're finding all the stuff that refutes what you've learned growing up. Then you find all the stuff that refutes Christianity in general. It's just like I just noticed that this morning. Like that's fascinating to see that how that transitioned over time. That writing.
Hmm. It is. So it sounds like you're kind of bringing us up to more of a current day scenario. What was it like to actually finally say I'm done? Like how long did that process take? And was there a specific week or day when you just said suddenly I just really don't believe this anymore. I'm done thinking about it? Or like how did it work and what were the obstacles? Like what were there people in your life who were gonna you feared like hey, if I do this, you know, if I do this, that's gonna happen. And bad things, people are gonna write me off or call me a traitor. Like what were the obstacles to actually getting out?
Yeah, I have a lot of things written down that we can actually go over some kind of, you know, some of the what I call crazy things that I heard after I left. But I would say it was probably a good 2 year period where I was, you know, one at one point. So this would have been okay, well, 4 years, 5, 6. So I'd say probably 7 years ago, maybe, is when I finally felt like, okay, I have this. I'm trying to make this work. I'm starting to realize that okay, there's something going on here that I need to examine myself because I'm not getting the answers. Previous to that, I would say I was fervent in prayer for a long time previous to that. Because as I got older and older, and especially when I got into my 40s, I'd say from early 30s to early 40s, I probably had a good 10-year span where I struggled with depression, which I found later as I was examining stuff is all related to the cognitive dissonance and stuff, you know. So um, I'm trying to reconcile all these things in my mind, which was driving me into deep depression. When I got in my early 40s, I was severely depressed, where I spent a good, I'd say, a year or two where I felt like I was just almost numb, you know. And so I had heard something which is, you know, kind of funny looking back on it, because I went through the whole Jordan Peterson, you know, all that 10 rules for life and all that stuff, and which I eventually, you know, at first you know, had Jordan Peterson on a pedestal, and then over a couple of years I worked my way up to now, you know, he's more like a grifter in my eyes type of thing. But it's funny what can spark a certain thing. And when I was listening to his biblical series and he's talking about allegory with Noah's Ark, that was like the first time I gave myself permission to look into things, because you're conditioned your whole life within church to be afraid of evidence information, you know. Don't look into things because you'll lose your Christianity. And I've heard that from since I was a little kid. And it was pounded in you all the time. Do not look into things. You know, you're gonna lose your Christianity. Well, when I first heard about allegory, which I didn't know anything about, like what is first step one, what is allegory? You know? That gave me the permission, okay, I'm gonna look into all this stuff. Because when I first found out, you know, like Epic of Gilgamesh and stuff, it was like mind blown. Like these stories come from somewhere. And okay, these stories that you believe as truths and you're told to by people in position of authority, and also people that you consider nice, you know, quote unquote nice people, are telling you this stuff. Why would I not believe it? They seem nice. Why would they wouldn't want to lead me astray? Well, they're not lying to me. They just don't know themselves, you know? So they don't have intent to deceive me. They just don't know. Well, then that started the ball rolling. So I spent a good, probably I'd say 2 years where I was looking at like into where these ideas kind of originated, or how they grew. I should say how they grew and morphed over time. And the more you learn, it's like, wow, like these, a lot of this stuff is man-made construct. And you know, reading books from like Bart Ehrman's Heaven and Hell that was probably the first, I'd say it's the first book that I read coming through that I felt like, okay, after I read that, I had permission to read every book from like every scholar, philosopher, you know, all these academics. And what's funny is, a little aside from that, previous to that, you know, Austin's in college. He's reading all these books by Steven Pinker, Micah Shermer, all these other academics. And Austin shared one book with me by Steven Pinker, and I got a couple, maybe a chapter or two into it, and then I found out, well, he's a humanist and all this other stuff. And I remember telling Austin, you know, basically mocking humanism stuff, and gave the book, like pushed the book aside, like, I can't read this, and you know, this guy, I'm looking down at him in my eyes. And it's funny to see now is like I've learned so much from people like Steven Pinker and you know, even Bob Price on Myth Vision. You know, I know Bob's in some hot water with all this political stuff, but things like that, learning from people like that, you learn so much to say, okay, a lot of what I've heard and learned over my lifetime comes from stories and mythology, Mesopotamian mythology, Greek mythology, stuff like that. So you go through this transition period of, okay, here I am, I'm, you know, I go through 2 years of that, then I'd say, you know, maybe a year where I'm still a Christian, but I'm having a lot of doubts. I'd probably said just 10% Christian at that time. And I kept learning and go, and then it was like all of a sudden all the pieces came together, and I'm like, you're looking at everything, it's like, okay, this is all like ideas that certain people have had over time, and you accept them as what you think is truth because it seems like most people believe this stuff. So you think, well, you know, most people believe it's probably true. But once you break down the origination points to these ideas, I mean, a lot of times you can't find the actual origin of like when the first idea popped, but you can see it grow and morph. It's like even the rapture stuff, you know, you think the rapture was always a belief. Well, you find out most of it came in the early 1800s and stuff. That wasn't that long ago. So all that stuff just all came together, and it's like, poof, like this is, I don't know anything. I have no idea where, you know, like creation universe, all that stuff. What I do know is that this was just a man-made construct. This is just ideas of men. And when I had that epiphany, I was like, it changed everything, you know, that depression and stuff, it just kind of dissolved. But if it, I'll rewind here a little bit. When I first gave myself permission to start examining these things, it was probably about a 2-year process before I got to a point where one day, and I wish I had written down the day it was, because I was at work. I had, you know, I have a stand-up desk at work. I'm working, And at that point, those 2 years of examining stuff, everything came together at once. And I felt like all of a sudden I kind of stood up a little straighter. I felt like the million pounds went off my shoulders, and like my mind, like a cocoon over my mind just disappeared. And I was like, wow, like that was like the one moment where everything just would just change for me. I'm like, this is amazing. I thought, now I'm gonna go on this journey of just learning as much as I can, and just continue to learn and grow as I go through life, but leave myself as open-minded as possible to be accept evidence and pivot on evidence. Like if I believe one thing and I have this bias for one thing, I give myself, you can pivot on good evidence. And learning that, for going from a dogmatic binary thinking, black and white, right and wrong, to being able to say, I was wrong on this, and I can actually believe this now, which is mind blowing. It's like, this is what my mind was struggling with for 40 years, but I just didn't know it at the time. I didn't know anything about psychology, studying psychology and human behavior on my own as a layman. Just it made a world of difference.
Mm. It's amazing, that process. I love it. I love hearing how you went through it. And ditto for me, when the blinders fell off, it was like, wow, this is awesome. I mean, it was
You
a
see the
little bit of
world.
anger.
Yeah, there's a little bit of that, but you get to see the world clearly. Like I said, the
Yeah.
cocoon is the best thing I come up with. That cocoon, or like how Robert Price described it when he's sitting in a cafeteria at university, and the day the walls of fundamentalists came down for him. He said he looked around and he's like, these are all just people. He no longer divided them with saved and unsaved. There's people. And I always like the description that he gave that, because it's like, that's what I had. I looked around at the people I worked with. I looked around people out in the world. And I'm like, these are people. They're just people. No longer saved and unsaved. It was so refreshing to feel like that.
Mm. I think too, just the idea of going back to what you said earlier, trying so hard to make the pieces fit, logically, rationally, but also the pieces fit in terms of you trying to fight against your desires, whether it's, lust or just doing something you want to do, like, being involved in sports, being able to realize that you've truly been in a prison, but in a certain sense, at least once you get to a certain age and can understand what's happening, you've kind of had the keys this whole time. And so what's happening is you're actually taking your autonomy back and saying, yeah, I've been in this prison, this mental prison, but the keys have been slowly appearing in my hands. And I finally realized I had them, but I've had them for a while, but now I've used them. And you're like, I've finally got power over my future, and whatever time in my life I have in the future, it's under my power, not under the power of, a bunch of dead men who wrote books thousands of years ago. Like this is me living my life for the first time, and it's so amazing. And it's honestly kind of scary too to think about how easy I think it would have been for a lot of us. And I readily admit this, that if certain chips had fallen certain ways, I could have imagined myself staying in this forever. But to think, all right, I'm so glad that I did get out and I've got some time left, and hopefully I can make a difference for my own family and my loved ones
Yeah.
and so forth.
Yeah, I
But
had those
just to
same
realize,
feelings.
yeah, just to realize it's like you've won the lottery. It's depressing, it's angry, but it's like you won the lottery. You escaped a mental prison.
Yeah. And there's times, I mean, like now I'm in a good place. I'd say in the last year is everything is finally, like I feel like I'm finally in a good place where I'm healed from everything, all the religious trauma, all that stuff. And it's like there was times too where once I deconverted out of Laestadianism and then deconverted out of Christianity, it's like there's times where I might here and there grieve over what I feel like I've lost, because there's things that I like to pursue that would have fulfilled my passions. Like I said, if I could have involved in sports or mixed martial arts in any capacity, whether I was just working in the marketing department or whatever, or a trainer or whatever, that would have been my thing. But I'm like, that's past. I can't. You come to terms with, I can't change that, and all I can do is from this moment forward is be me, be authentic me. And what I also am very happy that my children got out young. So like even though they were stuck in this prison until they were into adulthood, into 18 or 19 or 20, I think, well, they still have a long life ahead of them. So I'm grateful. I feel guilty that I kept them in this religion that long and kept them from doing things that would have been, the things that frustrated me, that I repressed, that I wasn't allowed to do, I end up doing to my own children too. And I feel guilt about that. But thankfully you just have to talk to them and say, I did the best I could, and I apologize for that. And look at the bright side. You're out and you're 18. I didn't get out till I was, in my mid 40s. I mean, look at the bright side.
Yeah.
So, and I think, well, I still got half my life ahead of me to, and just be me.
Yeah, exactly. And I can say ditto. I had to apologize to some people too. Fortunately, my kids are still in their younger years, but yeah, I affected a lot of people with preaching over the years. And it broke my heart. Then I quit. I apologized to many of them, but there were people that, you just lose touch with people. You can't apologize to everybody. And too, that some of them won't accept it anyway. So it's like it's hard because at that point it wasn't just my influence, of course, but just the whole church culture. It literally shaped so many people's lives that if I said, "Hey, I'm sorry for teaching you this," they would say, "Well, you're an idiot. You should come back to the Lord." So the apology would have fallen on some deaf ears, I'm sure. But in terms of before we switch to Austin, I did want to just kind of ask too, Ricky, could you touch on the idea of how people responded to you once you made it more public, and how did you make it more public, and what was the response?
Yeah, there's a lot we can go into that. And I in fact I wrote a long list of notes here about crazy. I call it crazy stories. And there's a lot of them we go through. Obviously, it was very difficult because I knew, okay, when I decided or knew that I could no longer go to the church, I resigned myself to the fact that, okay, I have to be authentically me, and this is going to hurt a lot of people, and this is going to be a very painful process. And I knew all that going in, and I knew what to expect. And within that couple of years of examining everything, I watched hundreds and hundreds of stories of ex-fundamentalists from Mormon Stories podcast, XJW content, a lot from Myth Vision. So I had heard hundreds of stories of people that have left these type of environments. So I kind of knew what to expect. And another side, quick, with that is that what I also learned from watching and listening to all those stories is that the common things that are said in these fundamentalist religions that I thought were unique to our church and they happen in all of them. They say the same things. And you were born with a silver spoon in your mouth. How fortunate were you that were raised in this religion? Without this religion, you have nothing. All those things were said to all the other fundamentalists in the stories I heard. Like, and the first few that I listened to when they were bringing up these things, like we were told that, if we leave this religion, we lose everything. I'm like, oh yeah, I was told that too. We were born with a silver spoon in our mouth. Our preacher said the exact words: "You're born with a silver spoon in your mouth." And every time I hear something along those lines that were key talking points at church, it was like mind blown. Like, oh, the Mormons say that, the JW say that, the this religion, that religion. You're going down all these, like it's all the same. It's just men trying to condition people to believe that you're special. You're the chosen. You're in the right religion. Boy, are you fortunate you were born in this exact geographical region. I mean, it's just stuff like that is just silly.
Austin, we'll switch to you, Ricky. Thank you so much for getting us started here. And Austin, same question to you. I know it's we're obviously touching on some stuff that your dad's already shared, but pretend he's not shared all that. What's your story? Where are you coming from religiously?
Yeah, so I was born into the old Apostolic Lutheran church. So, like my dad was saying, his family had already been there. So once I was born, I was raised there from, as a child. So as far back as I can remember, when I was a kid, we attended church there, and it was just what you did, right? You went with your parents and you were told things about how the world is and what you should think and believe and feel. And I tried to do the best that I could with what was taught to me. And unfortunately at the time, it felt like unfortunately when I was a kid. Right now, as an adult, I'm glad I was the way I was, but it just didn't really take. So, I know a lot of people that come out of different religions will have those kind of stories where, I really, really felt this strongly. I had a relationship with Jesus or with God or whatever. My story was really one of trying to do that very hard, right? Trying earnestly to make that happen, and it just could not happen. I was very skeptical from when I was a kid. things just did not sound right, did not add up, didn't seem right. And so, you think, well, maybe there's something wrong with me, right? Why doesn't this stick? Why doesn't it take?
Do you remember some of the things that you were mentally going through to say this doesn't sound right? Were you talking about the actual stories in the Bible, or more just like the theological construct?
Um, it was really all of it, all of those different things to some degree, right? There was stories, there were theological ideas. There were also kind of just broader philosophical concepts about things like the origin of the universe or matter and energy. Where did those things come from, right? The common explanation was, well, God brought all that into existence. But as a kid, I would wonder, well, then where did he come from, right? Not, they would say, well, something can't come from nothing, right? God had to do it, but God came from nothing, or he always existed, right? But why couldn't the same thing be true about matter and energy, right? Maybe they're a brute fact, maybe they just always existed, or maybe we just don't know and we can't say anything about it, so we should just shut up about it and put our heads down and try to work and figure it out and just be okay with saying we don't know the answer to that question, right? But if as a kid, if you ask something like, well, where did God come from? You would be met with like uh kind of a stern look of, hey, you should don't be asking that kind of a thing. We don't ask questions like that. So that was kind of a red flag, is why can't I inquire about something like this? This is an interesting question, right? Why can't we talk about it or think about it?
Does that particular denomination preach a young earth then, I assume?
It's more kind of tacitly they do it, right? They don't come out and make it a major talking point, but if you were to ask about it, they would ascribe to that view, or they would subscribe to that view. Um, so they do take on that view, but it's not like a big preaching point or selling point for the faith. But if you were to like open up a book and it had something about some animal species and their lineage originated 42 million years ago in this area or something, they'd be like, oh, well, that's obviously ridiculous, right? They would not um, be willing to accept that or think about that. So they definitely would not sign on to anything like evolutionary change or descent with modification, or the fact that our planet is um, very old, right, in terms of several billion years as opposed to the thousands.
It's amazing to me the way that they really poison the well for I know Ricky, you were kind of alluding this to in different ways, but just the idea of don't go to those people. Don't listen to them. They're humanists or they're evolutionists. But the idea of like if you go to them, they're so dangerous that you don't even like you technically, yes, you could pick up the book if you wanted to. We're not going to stop you necessarily, but know that if you do, it's like you're picking up a stick of dynamite. And they would tell me so many stories about and I subscribe to a lot of Christian stuff just to keep my finger on the pulse of it. And this idea of if you go to a secular university, the chance of you losing your faith is very, very high. So why do it? Why go there? And they're and bring in these kind of topics like if you go there, you are going to experience people saying the earth is very old, evolution did occur, and therefore it's going to make you question the narrative. And once you start questioning, just like Ken Ham and those other people say, once you lose Genesis 1 and 2, and you start to lose the whole sin, the fall, like if we didn't fall through sin, then what do we need Jesus for? Once that narrative crumbles, you're done. And so they just say, just don't go there, it's so dangerous. And I remember feeling like myself growing up, it wasn't like I was just like afraid of them. I was like, you all are, meaning you all on that side of the fence theologically, you all are just so satanic. You're being used by Satan to deceive so many people. It wasn't like I didn't need to be protected from their stuff. I didn't want it. I just knew that I knew it was garbage and that it was hurting people. And it's amazing once you poison the well, you don't even need to protect people. They'll just ignore that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So what happened next in your story?
So really that type of thing, it continued as I went through childhood and um, you know, became a teenager. And sometimes I would sneak in some questions about things, if we were having conversations with people or visiting at friends or family's house, relatives, things like that. and just kind of see what information I could get from people about some of the things that they believed, or the church members believed, that didn't really make sense to me, right? Or things that were contradictory. There was a lot of talk about the abilities that the preachers have, because they are supposedly a conduit for God's direct speech, right? He basically says something and speaks through them, right? It's like sending a signal right into their brain, and they say exactly what God is thinking, right? So it's a direct hotline to God's thoughts, but sometimes they would say contradictory things, or they would get a piece of factual information wrong, or two of them would give different pieces of advice. And that always really bothered me, because I could notice that as a kid, that would happen sometimes. And I would think, why doesn't anybody say anything about this? This doesn't make sense. Why would God get things wrong, or give out contradictory information, or speak through of two different human conduits and tell them different things? Either it's not true, or God doesn't have all of the attributes that they assign to him, or he's purposely trying to trick people, right? Maybe he's not actually all knowing or something, right? Or maybe he wants to sow confusion some way. But either way, something about it isn't um, adding up, right? And so I would have kind of questions about that to see, well, maybe there's something I'm missing, right? Maybe there is some kind of solution to this problem. But what you get is not a solution to those problems. You get something like, why are you asking this? Why are you even thinking this? Like, there's something wrong with you for even asking that, right? Are you trying to be defiant? Are you trying to, be a smart ass? Something like that, right? Why are you doing this? And so that kind of sows that doubt more in your mind, because if somebody really cared about understanding these things, and I really did, I wanted to understand the world that I lived in, how it works, the things that I'm supposed to do to be living right. And so I wanted answers to those questions, because I wanted to have an accurate picture of how things work and what I'm supposed to do. And to be met with those types of responses kind of makes you think, okay, maybe these people really don't know what they're talking about. Maybe some of the things that they believe aren't true, because they're not equipped to, not only are they not equipped to answer it, they're not equipped to be able to engage with these types of questions in a mature way, which is to say, let's think about that, and let's talk about that, and let's discuss that. Um, but to shut it down in that way, it was a red flag. I didn't like that. Um,
Yeah, you'd be
when I was a
told
kid,
that you'll get the answers later on in the afterlife, and that you should just be worried about Jesus died for your sins and repent type of stuff, you know?
Hmm. It's amazing how you're, I would say ditto too with my story, where it's like this second tier of reasons to deconvert. Like the first tier is like maybe the actual information that you're getting, even though you're getting limited information at first, like you're getting information that's making you question it. But the fact that you're people that should be, you should be proud of them. Like you should be thinking, you want to think as a Christian, like I'm proud of the people in my church. I want to be like, I want to find some godly men to mentor me, and I want to mimic their lives, just like Paul talks about, follow me as I follow Christ. And the idea of realizing I don't feel like they're my people as much. Like I don't want to be like them. Once those seeds start to get in there, it's like, okay, so this information is flooding, and my people are not my people anymore, and they don't. So many of them are oblivious to the fact that it's happening, or they, like you said, they feel like you're just being defiant. So you're going through your rebellious phase, whatever, to God, but God will pull you back. But it's like, no, this is not about rebellion. This is about intellectual curiosity and about intellectual academic honesty. And if you all aren't going to, step up to the plate and prove yourselves academically honest, then you truly are becoming not my people. And that for a lot of people that doesn't necessarily lead to deconversion, but it makes you think, I don't know that I can trust the Christians who are my family. And boy, I really think Christians don't understand what they're doing when they do that. I think they're truly, by and large, oblivious to how many seeds of doubt they're sowing, not by the information, but by the lack of willingness to address the information. And I know for me, like I'm beating a dead horse here, but I said to a lot of people, I've found endless quotes from the book of Enoch in the New Testament. And I told all kinds of Christians about it. And they basically said, we don't think that's true. I said, I can prove it. I've got it. It's right here. And they said, well, whatever. And they didn't even want to address the issue. And I'm like, yeah, but it's an issue because it makes you question, should Enoch have been in the canon? What, why would Jesus quote it over and over? He even calls it scriptures. He says to the, I think to the Pharisees at one point, you are mistaken because you don't know the scriptures. And then he goes on to quote Enoch. So I'm like, okay, so the canon might be messed up. And then you find out at one point that a lot of the church fathers did accept Enoch and thought it should have been in the canon. And and that's just one of, hundreds of issues. But once you start pulling at that and you realize Christians, number one, don't know by and large a lot of these issues or evolution or whatever, and then they don't want to address it, it's like, wait a second, what? And it changes the paradigm. It really does heavily.
Yeah, and really some of those things, there are groups that are more open-minded and do address those things, and that's probably something that allows them to um, retain people that obviously can't deny what is some pretty obvious reality in terms of some of the scientific information that we have about the world that we live in. It's not impossible to reconcile something like evolution with being a Christian if you interpret your Christianity in a certain way, right? You might have to make some tweaks about what you believe about God and His nature and what's in the Bible and things like that, but it's not impossible. It's
Were
certainly not
you
impossible to do it.
were you tempted to go down that route, more of a progressive Christianity?
For myself, not necessarily. When I really, really began to take a serious look at it, I wanted to really get down to the basics, down to the bare bones, nuts and bolts, and think about theism in general, right? What evidence, is there for theism? Looking at things like the afterlife, because really whether or not God exists doesn't really matter that much if there's no afterlife, right? There you could imagine some hypothetical universe in which there's a creator being that deity that sets off the universe in motion and then sits back and watches it unfold, and people die and you don't go anywhere, right? If that's the case, then it really doesn't matter, right? We don't in that type of a God, wouldn't matter if you could prove that it existed or not. For your own sake, you would live and die as a human being, just the same as if there was no deity, right? So really, it kind of hinges on the fact that we have to continue existing after we die on Earth, and that something happens to us. So that was really a big um, topic of investigation for me, was really looking at theism in general and looking at something like, is this a realistic concept, going somewhere when you die? In terms of theological concepts, I think that the afterlife is probably one of the weakest ones of all. A lot of people like myself, who are academics, who have done any type of investigation on the subject, would generally say, yeah, there's no good evidence for this. It's not something that we would actively believe. I would go even further to really bet my uh, everything that they're really, when you die, you're dead. There is just so much evidence against the fact that your consciousness could continue existing in any way without you being alive. And so that really was a big nail in the coffin, because if you die and you're just dead, um, obviously that's not compatible with Christianity, right? And that's one of, I've done a lot more than just look into that, but those were really some of the big starting points that got me started with really leaving Christianity behind.
About what age would you say you were when you started to really say
I would have
it's falling apart?
been like late teenager, really like 19, 20. Really around the age of 20, I think I had amassed a pretty decent amount of knowledge by that point.
Was that
Um,
coinciding with your dad's questioning?
it was a little before. I'd like to think it probably helped set his journey in motion a little bit.
Yeah, because you
I would
realize
imagine it.
you're listening to Austin, visiting him. So, I wouldn't say that he deconverted me or anything, but just being around him and talking about things, there was things I never thought about before. And at some point you realize I don't know anything. Like I think I know anything. I think the less I knew, the more I thought I knew. And as you really start learning, you realize you don't know anything, you know? It's like, so that's what started the journey. Yeah.
And you realize that if you've been in a church for a long time, that in a sense, theoretically, you should know a lot more. And that's kind of freaky too, to think these guys didn't tell me anything. Like they told me the party line, but that's it.
Yeah. And Austin left the church several years before I did. I don't know how many, I don't remember how many it was, five maybe.
Something like that,
And
yeah.
that was devastating to myself and my wife as Christians to have their son, you know, he was it about 18 or so is when you left the church, 18, 19, somewhere around there. And
Hmm.
to us it was devastating because not only did he leave the church, he also said he doesn't believe in God and he's an atheist, which at that time to us is a bad word, you know.
Hmm. Were you trying? Sorry to go back and forth here, but were you trying, Ricky, to at that point uh, pull him back? You know, save him and say you don't know what you're doing. This is Pascal's wager kind of stuff. Like you're dangling over the fires of hell, and you might be 18 and you think you're going to live to be 80, 90, 100, so you got plenty of time, but you might not. You might not live out the night, and
No.
so you got to take this. Were you trying to send that kind of messaging to him?
Oh yeah, for sure. And and then you're trying to rationalize and say, well, he just doesn't understand, you know.
Mm,
And it's funny looking back on it. It's like I'm saying he doesn't understand, and it's like I didn't understand. I was the one that was lacking knowledge. So yeah, it was painful. It was hard, but we never like even though he said he didn't believe in all that stuff, we always wanted him in our life and we loved him and all that stuff. And I mean, there was a good 6 months where it was very strained, like because you know how it is, we're as Christians, and we kind of feel like we know it all, and he just didn't get it, and you're not willing to ask the questions of him of like, what do you think we got wrong, type of thing, and then he also didn't want to ratchet up the tension, so Austin didn't really tell us, big long list of things that were problematic. He just pretty much left it as like, I have my beliefs and you have yours, you know. And I remember telling him like, I know God exists, and he's like, you can't know that. And I was like, yes, I do. It's like then when you think about it later, it's like, now how do I really know that he does exist, you know?
mm,
So yeah, it
it's
was just
amazing.
that it was a stressful time, but it was also like I said, I think that's kind of when the wheels started going of realizing, I got a lot to learn.
Mm. And Austin, for you, where I know that for a lot of us who deconvert, especially if you deconvert a little bit later in life, as I did, just like your dad, but the whole idea of losing the afterlife, were you young enough during your questioning that you would say that was less impactful? Did you kind of still have a regret of like, damn it, I was wanting to live forever? I know people joke about how it would get boring praising God all the time, but just the idea of like it's going to be, beyond your wildest dreams, even though it might sound boring, it won't be. It will be wonderful bliss, joy, and also the idea of anyone that you've lost, you could see them again. Did that loss hit you hard at all when you were deconverting?
Oh, definitely. That was really one of the biggest things at play. I think in my entire life, growing up. I mean, I worried about that when I was in kindergarten, and maybe even before. But as far back as I can remember, I mean, I remember being 5 years old and staying up at night, not being able to fall asleep thinking about that, because I didn't want to stop existing, right? I wanted to keep doing stuff. I wanted there to be something and to not have to um you know grow old or maybe suffer some tragedy and accident and then um be gone, right? Just like I was before I was born, right? There's just nothing. You don't exist, right? All these things I would think about history and all the thousands of years of human civilization and things that have played out. And I had no idea that any of it was occurring yet because I didn't exist, right? There was no me. The all of the particles that make up who I am and the configuration of material that makes up my body was not combined in that way, and I didn't exist, right? There was no me. And on some level, I kind of knew that that's what would happen again, and I didn't like it. So I wanted to believe that I would continue existing. But on some level, in the back of my mind, I knew that it wasn't true. And so that really, really bothered me. And finally, when I got older and I really looked into it, with an open mind, but honestly as well, right? Not allowing my cognitive biases to latch on to weak evidence and things like anecdotal stories about, somebody who said they saw their dead relative or something when they were in a comatose, or, those types of stories, um, that are very problematic in a number of different ways. But to look at it honestly, finally I said, okay, I have to let it go and be okay with it, and learn to be okay with that. It is inevitable, like so many other things in our life, like aging, right? You have to just make the most of what you have. Be grateful for what you do have, your health, your family, the things that you have in your life, and enjoy them, and don't take them for granted, because it's temporary. We are ephemeral creatures. We will not be here forever. And someday I will close my eyes for the last time and go to sleep and never wake up again. And um, I had to learn to be okay with that. And it was a very hard thing to let go, because you want to believe it so bad, but you have to you have to accept what the best evidence we have tells us, and and you look at it honestly and make the most of it. I think it's a much better way to live. It is for me personally. I have much less death anxiety now than I did as a Christian who was trying to um, conform to the church and follow the rules and do all the things I was supposed to do and try earnestly to believe. I had it much worse. And
Mm,
learning to deal with it, I think, is a powerful thing. Obviously, it's something that will uh, invoke a fear response in anybody, right? You still get scared of it sometimes, but it's much less. It's not a daily pressing concern. I went through points when I was a teenager where I would have death anxiety so bad that sometimes, like, for days I would just do nothing, because like I couldn't even bring myself to do anything. It was so stressful. I'd feel like throwing up all day and stuff, because it just bothered me so badly.
mm. With with you deconverting earlier in life than your dad and I, did I'm assuming that that made a significant difference in terms of your trajectory for who you're looking for to marry. How did you think through that, and were you open to, partnering up with someone who had a religious side, or how did that play out? And what kind of core values did you start to shape as you were thinking about your future marriage?
Well, that's a learning process that, you know, um, it takes a long time. And, for myself, it was more of, I definitely did not want to, be in a relationship with somebody who was, religious beyond maybe kind of a base level. The kind of cultural Christians who don't really even think about it that much, or maybe even believe it that much, but maybe they'll go to church on Christmas and Easter or something. I probably would have been okay with that, if everything else lined up, right? I guess not what I would have been looking for, but I would tolerate it if all the other things were okay, in terms of our compatibility. Um, but somebody who was really involved, and active in that type of thing, um, probably wouldn't have worked out so well. Not because I would be like some angry, intolerant like person about it, but just because of somebody's kind of core foundational, um, ontologies, their views of reality are that different. It's just going to naturally bring problems. On its own, right? I mean, if you had kids or something, one person's going to want to probably raise them in the church, whereas I wouldn't want to do that so much. I would say, let's educate the kids, and when they're old enough to make that decision for themselves, they can certainly do it. I wouldn't be the type that would be like, you're not allowed to go anywhere near a church and blah, blah, blah. But I would talk openly about it. How do we know this? How do we know that? Have you thought about this? Have you checked this out? Have you looked at this? And when kids are old enough, they can make that decision, um, for themselves, right? That's something that they should be able to, um, think about and make an autonomous decision on, rather than be indoctrinated from a young age and then maybe have to go through the pain of getting out of that when they learn more things about the world.
Hmm, great answer. And your your spouse is, I assume, then not on the spiritual side of it, more on the rational side of it.
Yeah, so we're a totally non-religious, non-believing household here as well. And our youngest, my youngest stepdaughter is 7 years old, and she's never believed in any of that stuff. So we don't actively like tell her those things, and she'll sometimes ask questions, and we'll talk about it a little bit. In a town not far from here, there's a big like wooden a carved statue of Jesus on a cross, um, really big. She did ask about that um, not that long ago, and I explained like what crucifixion was and what they did it for, and those types of things, and gave her some of the historical background, and this is what Christians believe about it, blah blah blah. And so we'll educate her, tell her those types of things, but I mean, she says like I don't believe in God and um things like that, or Jesus or any of that stuff, and that's okay, right? I'm just like, oh, okay, yeah, we don't either, that's all right. We'll be like at school there's going to be a lot of kids that do, and they might tell you this or that thing, but it's okay to be different. You don't have to think what they do or whatever, just because probably most of your classmates will. This is a very religious area, and so we haven't had any trouble with that. So it's very be yourself, be who you are, explore things, find yourself, find your identity, and we'll be supportive and here to give answers and guidance and things like that, but not this kind of authoritative, you're going to do this, you're going to think that, you're going to be this type of a person. um as a kid you don't want somebody telling you that, and so when you're an adult, if you need to be in touch with who you were as a child and think about what it felt like and what you did and didn't want people telling you, and try to do the best you can and try to do better, right? So that's definitely what I try to do over here.
That's awesome. I love too just the idea of just how proud it can make you feel as a parent to think, the next generation, whether it's your own kids or for Ricky, for your grandkids, just to look at the next generations and think they're going to be free of so much garbage that I had. Like um, whether it's the sexual repression or just the general guilt, like you're guilty, you're so guilty that someone had to literally be tortured because you're so guilty. All that stuff. You're wicked. You're born wicked. You're currently wicked. All these things God can see in your head, and he hates what he sees so much of the time. So many messages, and just think they're just like a much cleaner slate. Like they can just absorb reality, absorb life, absorb themselves, claim their identity so much younger. And I feel like in some ways I'm still going through that process of figuring out who I am and reclaiming myself. And I've done a lot of work in it, but it still feels like it's an ongoing process. But just to think these kids can just start from age, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, they can start saying, I'm I'm myself and I can choose. I have the power to choose what I want to believe, who I want to be, and to think what I want to think, do what I want to do. And there's nobody restricting me, in terms of a theological construct. And I love it. It almost breaks my heart to think about what it would have been like if I had done too much damage. And Ricky, you touched on this a little bit, but just, I did do damage to certain people. Unfortunately, it was, not my own children, it was other people's. I feel bad about that. But, you and adults too, but, you passed it on to certain people and you wish you could take it back. But just to look at these kids and think, wow, like I could have done so much damage if I hadn't woken up. And they could be metaphorically in the same prison as that I was in, and all of us just sitting here in this dark prison wasting our lives away, and yet they're starting their lives out in the sunshine in the meadow. And who knows what they'll do with it, hopefully some really good things, but at least they've got a fighting chance. um, well, I do want to pass it back to Ricky too at this point to make sure we got a chance to hear the topic of how people responded to you. But I'd also love to hear, after I've got a few other questions. I'll say I'll stop there and I'll ask my questions after you get a chance to talk about that.
Okay. Yeah, the leaving the religion stuff. And we didn't really touch on this, but like my wife, she didn't wasn't actually born and raised in the church. We started dating when she was probably 15. I think she was 15, 16, somewhere around there. So we were dating for a while, and she didn't. It's kind of funny because with the church we have these they call church meetings. There'll be a meeting weekend where they'll have church like Friday, Saturday, Sunday, 2 a days, and so here, I met her at just our local mall and stuff when we were teenagers, and we were hanging around, and eventually, we till we liked each other, we were comfortable around each other. But like on a church meeting weekend, I just tell her, "Well, I'm gonna be gone for a couple hours, but we'll come back downtown later." And she'd be wondering like, "Where is he going?" And I don't want to tell her I was going to church. I don't want to seem like a nerdy church boy. I was trying to be cool. So we'd go to church and then come back downtown in the evening and hang out and stuff like that. And then eventually she started. We had a good group of friends or whatever, and guys within the church, and I had one, quite a good group of friends, big group of friends, and a lot of us were like, I had one friend that was a lot like me. He was more into the comic books and the science fiction and music, particularly music and stuff like that. So I always had a good bond with one friend and he hasn't gone to the church in several years, many years either. So I still consider him like my best friend because he's somebody you can identify with, as like we like a lot of the same things. But anyway, so my wife, or girlfriend at the time, she starts hanging out with this group of people, and then eventually she starts coming to church with us. And like the first time she came happened to be on a communion Sunday, which that on the communion Sunday is when there's like a big movement within the whole church. It's almost like a buzz in the room because there's so many people that are weeping and hugging each other and asking forgiveness. And me as a dumb teenage boy, I didn't think to like explain to her like what's going to happen or something. So she's sitting there with two of her friends, and this movement happens, and the preacher's weeping and talking about how sinful he is and stuff, and everybody's going around hugging each other and asking forgiveness. And her and her friends are like looking around the room like, what is happening here? Like she had never really seen a man cry before, and here she's seen a few hundred men just bawling. And anyway,
Wow.
I'm surprised that didn't scare her off. But you know how young love is. You just want to be with that person, so you just whatever you can do to be with the person. So we just, she'd come to church with me. And then there was a while, even as a teenager, I probably didn't go to church for a good 6 months or so. I'd always use the excuse of work. I'd work late at Burger King at 16, 17 years old, and by the time I cleaned the grill and that on Saturday night, Sunday morning, I didn't feel like going to church, so I just wouldn't go. But anyway, fast forward a little bit, and at some point, as we're more serious in our relationship as teenagers, we were talking about eventual marriage and stuff someday, and I was like, well, I wouldn't marry somebody that wasn't going to our church. Like, if we're gonna have kids, I want somebody that's going to church with me, because that's the kids' chance for salvation, our future children and stuff. So, she was having also some, other, say, stressful home situations. I won't go into a lot of details of those, but it's like she was prime for getting involved in like the high control religion, because there is more of that structure there, and you hear that happen to people quite often, where if they're in a certain vulnerable point in their life, those type of religions you can get scooped up in because you feel like there's some like community there and stuff. So eventually she, what they do is, eventually when you come to understand the religion, you do you ask for forgiveness in front of the whole congregation. So you go up to the altar and tell the congregation, that I've spoken of things that are bothering me, and I'd like to ask for your forgiveness and stuff. And she did that, and then fast forward a couple years later, we got married and stuff, and so she started coming to the church in her teens. And it's funny as all the years went by, I was always still, like I said, trying to struggle, one foot in the church, one foot out, just always battling that. And there was a point where she actually got more into the church than I ever was, and people, I'd say, quote unquote, knew her from the heart type of stuff, and
Hmm.
so what was it's funny how the way life works. It's like I get her into this church, based on I'm not going to marry somebody from outside the church. Then here I am, and we're in our in our 40s, and all of a sudden I've deconverted all Laestadian is my mind. I'm like, I went to the church, I'd say, for a full year where I was mentally out but physically in. And so, and I didn't tell her because these are things that you're afraid to talk to about people, because I thought, I don't want to like rip the rug out from under her and tell her what I'm thinking, because it might freak her out, and you don't know like how this is going to go. So I'm working through my mind for a long time, like, how am I going to handle this? And at one point, I was just like, you know what? I'm not going to believe ever again, but I'll just keep coming every Sunday. I even have to go my whole life. I'll come every Sunday, but just not really participate, just kind of check out and kick back. And I mean, she could obviously tell her something different about me, but couldn't quite put her finger on it. And at one point, we were just out for a normal walk one evening, and I always thought maybe at some point there'd be a point where I could actually maybe talk to her a little about what I'm thinking or feeling, because communication in a marriage is just so important. And I guess I never really let on too much of, like, we had this divide in thoughts, just kind of going through the motions thing. But she said something that it triggered me. I'm like, okay, she has some questions, that things that she might be finding problematic. And I wish I could remember the exact specific thing that she said, but whatever it was at the time, I'm like, this is my opening to talk about these things that are, I find problematic and they're troubling me, and where I'm at in my mind. And so I was like, I got something I'll talk to you about. And she's like, oh, of course your natural reaction is like, uh-oh. And so I started, spilling my guts a little bit about stuff. And she actually shared a bunch of things with me that she was chewing over and found problematic. And it was so nice to find out she was actually, you know, working through this stuff on her own too, like trying to figure out her beliefs, because there's things she saw and things that were happening in life that just didn't quite make sense to her, and advice she was getting and stuff like that. And so then after that, for months and months, we go for walks, long walks every evening, talk for hours, just over everything. And which is
Mm,
amazing. It was awesome because in those
it is.
situations, I'm thinking, what if I tell her all that stuff and she freaks out and is like, "Oh, this guy's dangerous, and I don't want to be married to him," or. And
I might have
thankfully,
an idea what that's like.
yeah, that's why I say I've saw some of your stories, and I mean, honestly, it breaks my heart. I think about it. I think about you quite often. So,
Mm,
and
thank you. Glad that she was able to start to walk through with you. That, I mean, that's, even if people don't agree, have the same conclusions right away. Just the freedom to be yourself and ask your questions honestly is so cool.
yeah, and even now, it's like things we don't line up on everything that we think, and which is something we get into a little later about, like patriarchy and like how people in the church like kind of feel. Well, I'll just bring it up now. Is like she was told by somebody, well, you left the church now too. It's like you're following your husband instead of God. And it's like, that's insulting to her. She has her own mind. I told her, and that's what I should bring up too at this point. I told her that, that first time that we talked, I said, no matter what you believe or what you think, I said, here's where I stand, but don't worry that I love you. I'm committed to you. We have a good relationship. I don't, if you want to go to church there for the rest of your life, that's fine, but I don't feel comfortable going anymore. But I'm committed to you no matter what. Because her first thought is, well, marriage is so important, and there's very rarely a divorce in the church and stuff. And she's thinking, well, what if he doesn't want me anymore and all this stuff? And I let her know that, no, you are incredibly important to me. And I said, even if you feel like you need the support at church, I said, I will come to the church with you every Sunday, for the rest of my life if that's what you need. But I said, I won't be there mentally. I'll be thinking about other things I gotta do this week or something. But I'd be willing to do that just to make her feel comfortable. Which, looking
Mm,
back at it now, so it's actually, that wouldn't have been very healthy for me. I think it sounded good at the time, but when you think about it, it's like being in there would have been, I think, a little too stressful or traumatic in my mind. But I thought I was tough enough I could handle it. But who knows? We'll never know now, hindsight. But
yeah, re-triggering. I've often
yeah,
thought too, if I haven't been to church in a while, but I think if I were to go to a church like in the context that you're describing, it'd be very difficult for me to not be sarcastic with people and to just feel like I want to get up and be like, really? Like, is no one
yeah,
else like bizarred out by the fact that we're pretending to eat somebody's body and drink his blood?
yeah,
And
drink his blood like
like,
cannibalism or
really?
something. But yeah.
No one else sees red flags here?
Yeah. And what's interesting too is like, okay, you're growing up and you're conditioned in that environment. So you're not really questioning like what the preachers are saying, you're accepting as this is the truth because the preacher is saying it. So you don't see things critically, and you don't, it's like when the preacher says something, the congregation nods their head. Well, once I had, spent that 2 years of examining everything like obsessively, and had so many tools in the toolbox, I'd hear things that I knew weren't correct. And then at some point I didn't realize it, but without thinking about it, I'd kind of turn to my wife and say, "Well, actually, that's not right." And I'd say something, and I'm like, "Oh, like I should have probably kept it to myself forever, but I couldn't help but pick out things that I knew they said that were wrong. And when they say that, like the Holy Spirit comes into the preacher, so it is God speaking to him because the Holy Spirit is using them as a vessel. And I'd be thinking, okay, why did God get that wrong? And everybody in the congregation is nodding their head, yes. And why would he be deceiving them? That type of thing. And I picked up on quite a few of those things, and it was actually fascinating sitting there for almost a year, being physically and but mentally out, because like you said, you peel that cocoon off your brain and you see things that you didn't see before. It's like fascinating to me. It was like, this is just fascinating. Like I'd like to write some about that too at some point. But um so anyway, as we're going through this process, our daughter, our youngest one, was getting up to the point of confirmation, which they go to at 15 years old. So then it was like, should we send her to confirmation? Like, do I just stop going to church now? Or do we let her go through the confirmation process? We talked about that for many weeks, and we finally came to the point, well, we'll let her go through confirmation and she can make her own decision about what she wants to do. I figured I went through confirmation there. The other two kids went through confirmation there. And I thought, she's an intelligent young woman. I'll let her make her own decision. And I think I could also tell that over the last few years that she had been kind of not really buying a lot of what she was hearing. So we decided, okay, we'll send her through confirmation, and which is about a week. It's about a week and a half. They go like just about every day. And well, day one, when I picked her up from confirmation, she started telling me all kinds of things that she found problematic with what the preacher said in confirmation. So in my mind, I'm thinking, oh, good, this transition is going to be easier than I thought. So we let her go through confirmation. I attended all the events, did what I had to do, but I was just mentally out. And so that final confirmation Sunday was the last time that I attended church, and it was such a relief. It was driving up to the church, I was thinking, oh, good, this is the last time I have to come here. And driving away from the church, it felt like 1,000,000 pounds was taken off my shoulders, because I'm like, I don't ever have to go here again or hear any of this nonsense.
Hmm.
But it's like my wife and my daughter and I still ended up going for a couple more months, which was difficult because, like, for them, because how you get love bombed then, because her heathen evil husband is not coming to church anymore, and they're feeling like she needs support and stuff. So that's when like all kinds of, I'd say, hurtful and inappropriate and crazy things were said and done along that time when she's going to church. And until it's finally some point, I remember the one Sunday she came home and said, I can't go anymore, because a preacher was like questioning how I could love you and stuff like that. And that was like the break for her. And my daughters, my middle daughter was going with them at the same time, and both the daughters felt like what they saw was happening with people coming up to my wife and the things they were saying. They thought, to them, it seemed like they're trying to drive a wedge between my mom and dad, and they know how close my wife and I are, and we're best friends. We spend almost all our time together. We've hardly ever been apart in our 30, July it'll be 30 years of marriage, and we've never spent more than maybe even a couple nights apart from each other. Like, we're always together. And they didn't like that one bit when they see people come up questioning how my wife could love me and stuff like that. That just was offensive to them. And they're like, I can't do this anymore. Like, they had to go too. So they all three of them stopped going at the same time then. But it's
Well,
like when
it is a truism though that you have to love Jesus more than anyone and be willing to forsake family according to the Gospels. And
exactly.
so it makes perfect sense. And you would, in some ways, it's horrifying that the preachments that Jesus does give to love him more than your own flesh and blood.
Yeah. And that's like I said earlier about choosing your husband over Jesus and God and stuff like that. Like, as it's just, I mean, it's kind of silly when you think about it. Like I said, you're taught like the man is like the head of the household, and it's like my wife is leaving the church to come my way, and I'm not going to offer her salvation, type of thing. And like along that journey too, when I was going through all that process of deconverting, at some point, then we figured, well, now's a good time to talk to Austin about it. So one day we went on a few hour car ride and just talked. And I don't, Austin could probably share the experience of how blown his mind was when I said I'm no longer going to go to church and stuff like that. But he helped with that process too. He gave a lot of good sound advice, and because we were wondering, how do we handle this with the girls, and how did you feel? What was your experience? And so that helped out a lot. And like, so when you're starting out this process, I mean, it is scary because there's so many unknowns. But then to see how it all played out over a couple of years span, it was, I mean, there's difficult times, stressful times, a lot of nights, missing sleep because you're overthinking things because of conversations you had with people from church or relatives and stuff like that. But it all still ended up working out wonderfully, where you get in this real good healthy place. And like I'd say, in the past years, when I finally feel like I've processed everything, I'm all the trauma, everything is just, I feel like I'm just in a great spot. Like I feel like the last years I'm finally living my true self and my authentic self. But leaving, I knowing I'm gonna have to deal with people are gonna come up to me and try to save my soul, scare me, all this other stuff like that. I know I have to go through this, and all I'm gonna have to do is try to disarm them with information, because I know a lot of them don't know a lot about the early history of Christianity, how these ideas morphed. They don't know all this stuff. So that I'm just gonna ask them questions, because I know these questions are gonna cause distress for them, and they're gonna flee and then leave me alone. So, and that's basically what I had to do. But you had things like happen, like even my wife had a friend of over 30 years that when I left the church, this friend told her, like, no matter what, I'm always going to be your friend. I'll always be there for you, doing the typical love bombing that I hear so much about from fundamentalists. And then the day that my wife decided she no longer felt comfortable going to the church, this friend told her, don't call me or text me. Wants nothing to do with it. You're of a different spirit. I'm like, I was like, I knew when she told you that she'll always be there for you, I knew she wasn't gonna be. And I knew, it's like, now she lied to you, and if she lied to her, maybe someday she should come ask her forgiveness for lying to her or whatever. But it's like, I know, you got that in group, out group divide, and saved and unsaved. It's like, it's too stressful for people in those environments to be around people that don't believe the same way they do. It's it just causes them a lot of turmoil to have to actually think that, is there something problematic here? So more or less, it's just they want to get hand wavy, not think about things. And what was really disheartening is when people that you love, and relatives or things like that would say things to my wife that was really hurtful to me, because it was like, you got pushed to the out group so fast, and you're looked at as like this evil worker and this evil person. And it's like somebody told my wife that you should probably start saving money, because he's probably going to leave you, just like, because I'm no longer going to church, all of a sudden I'm just going to leave her. And that was really hurtful, because like I told her, like, you don't have to worry about that at all. And my wife's, we're worrywart type, and something like that would, eat away at her and make her feel nervous and stuff. And I'm like, shame on them for putting that seed into her mind that start saving money because your husband might leave you. Or preacher told her that, yeah, your husband's probably going to start drinking now, and he's probably going to have to fill that void of the church with bad things and stuff like that. And I was like, I'm basically the same boring person I was when I was in the church as I am out. I got my little daily routines and stuff like that. But it's like, or several people told her, like, don't talk to your husband at all about church related stuff and things like that, because he might lead you astray. And it's like, stuff like that was offensive to me, because it's like, communication in marriage is so important, and you're telling her not to talk to me about something like that. Like, you shouldn't be butting in and doing stuff like that. Or she was, preacher told her too that bad things are going to happen to you, Amanda, because that way that'll be God's way of leading Ricky back to the church, because bad things are going to happen to you. And she's like, why me? Like, he's the one that left. Like, why would it happen to me? And it's like, because that'll lead him back. So there, you're planting that seed in her mind, making her nervous, like, the sky's gonna fall on her because you're heathen husband and stuff like that. And you get accused of, like, I heard somebody say, oh yeah, I always sensed, he had spiritual hatred in him for the church. And I'm like, I never hatred for anybody. In fact, leaving the church, I have more empathy for people. I'd say my heart is bigger, and I love more than I ever have when I was in the church, because in the church, you're judgmental and dividing all the time, And so, I mean, it's just, when you have people, somebody told her too that, called her up, and a friend called her up and told her that you're going to have like when you die, the gates of heaven are going to be slammed in your face. And then, why did you do this to me? And then, hung up on her and stuff, And it's like, to call up and holler at somebody, a friend of yours, to tell her gates of heaven are going to be slammed in your face. It's like, this is just, those type of religions like that, for the most part, I just feel like they infantilize people. Like you can't have like an open and honest discussion. It's like too much. They have a bias and they want to just confirm that bias, and anything else is too stressful. So it's like they can come out and dictate to you, this is what's going to happen, and you should be this way. But I don't want to hear what you have to say, you know. And it's like that's just not fair. If you're going to come to me, you know, to try and save me, you know, don't be sitting there throwing judgment at me and telling me all these things are going to happen. Like I said,
Yeah.
that's when I determined, okay, all I can do is ask them questions about not only really Christianity, but also like about Laestadianism, about, you know, about things that are contradictory. Um, you know, and of course I get the typical, you know, people say, oh, you know, you're bitter. It's like I have no bitterness at all. The only thing I feel is, for the most part, there's times where I feel a little embarrassed that I ever tried to buy into, especially for so many years. Like I feel like foolish. Like, okay, I'm in my it was in my 40s before I finally, the light bulb went off, and you feel kind of foolish. It's like, was I dumb? Did I not get it? But then you think, I give myself a pass. I think, no, you were conditioned from a small child, and a lot of that damage is done when you're real young. So it's like I gotta give myself a pass. You know that this has happened to people that are brilliant that have been roped into these type of things. You know, so it's like, no, you're not stupid. You're just conditioned. It's psychological conditioning. Once you understand that, it's like, no, forgive yourself for that. You know,
Yeah.
and
It's
just be
amazing.
thankful. Better late than never. You know?
Exactly. It's amazing too that they just like church people, not people who are in it for the culture, but people who truly, through and through believe it. They they really can't, like, they really evidence that they just can't imagine that this is truly mythology. And I think that was, going back to something I said earlier, like that was one of the biggest kinds of like sub issues for me was I've used this phrase before. Do you know the story Anne of Green Gables, the books?
I'm
You
aware
heard
of
of
them, but
those?
I haven't read them. Yeah.
They're very very sweet, cute books. They're kids books, but they were made into a TV series at one point. I know there's probably a couple newer versions of it, but the one I grew up with years ago, I loved it. Watched it far too many times to count. Anne of Green Gables is just a beautiful story, but she's this little kid who um, she's growing up in a world where everyone is kind of like very stiff and official and formal and proper, and she's out in just imagination land. She's imagining so many things, and she uses the phrase "scope for the imagination." And so people, call, they'll drive by a lake and they'll say, "Oh, that's Barry Lake," and she's like, "No, no, that's not Barry Lake. That's the lake of shining waters." And she comes up with these crazy, stories and names, but her creativity is giving her this sense of like, you can take what everyone else sees and say to yourself, imagine something a little bit bigger than that, a little different. And it comes out not in the sense of her academic investigation, but just in the sense of her artistic creativity. But I've loved that phrase, scope for the imagination, because it applies to this, where you're just kind of saying to these Christians, yes, it could have happened the way you're saying, granted, but could you also grant that it could have happened a different way? It could, it could, how would you imagine that the story of Jesus walking on the water came about? Yes, he could have actually walked on water, but is there another possibility for how that story came about? And it could go down that road endlessly with every story and nuance of the New Testament and the Old, but it's like the conclusion I keep coming back to with them is, you truly have no scope for the imagination, or you did have it maybe as a kid and you've learned to squash it. And that's terrifying to me, the fact that you can't be open as an adult, like a full ass grown adult. You can't say there might be another explanation and I should probably look into it and figure out which one is more likely. Anyway, I know you've mentioned before your conversation with Austin at that one time. Austin, I did want to ask you, tell us what was it like to hear your parents say, we're moving away from this stuff. What actually happened and what was your response?
Well, internally, I felt like, all right, it's about time. Glad to glad to hear it. Couldn't come soon enough. Because my family, they're smart people. And it feels like they had a lot of potential that they were kind of wasting by staying in that environment. My dad's a smart guy. And when it came to certain things, I kind of knew on some level that maybe he was fooling himself a bit or didn't want to fully kind of explore some things that are really interesting because of the potential theological ramifications. And so it was like, okay, good. Now that you're getting out of that environment, you can really tap into all that potential. And again, he's a smart guy. He's a fun person to talk to. So, there's a lot of cool, interesting stuff out there in the world that's fun to think about and talk about. And it's great to be able to do that type of thing, but you can't do it with somebody who's not ready to be able to do that and not open to that. So by saying, oh, yeah, I'm not a part of this anymore, it's very relieving in terms of, okay, well, we can just be ourselves, right? You don't have to have this thing in between everybody in terms of you guys are still going to church, and that's influencing how you interact and the type of things that you're okay with thinking about or talking about. It basically frees you to really discover who you are as a person and think carefully about every topic that there is out there, because you're not having to fit it into this box of, all right, this is who I am. I'm a member of this church and this is what we believe. And so I have to interpret my position on every issue as it relates to the church's position, right? You're really free to think about who you are and explore your thoughts, your values, and develop those things and maybe change them in certain ways. But the overarching point is that you're free to do that, whatever conclusion you come to. That possibility is there, and that possibility is where you can have interesting discussions about those types of things, and also be able to do so in a way that's fun and engaging and not angry, right? If somebody is going to be angry, condescending, things like that, I don't want to partake in that, right? That's not the type of way that I want to interact. I'm always willing to just to talk to people, lay ideas out there. How do we know what we know? Think about things, put our perspectives forward, even if some of them differ. That's okay. It shouldn't be something that makes you get mad and defensive and angry. But for a lot of people who have these dogmatic religious beliefs, that's their response. And so, I don't personally feel like partaking in that, but by not having that, and not having that potential for emotions rising about certain things, that makes it a lot easier to talk about stuff, because you can just talk about it, and not have to have a type of acrimonious dispute, things, something like that, because I just like to talk about things. It's fun to think about. It's fun to talk about nature, theology, or society, politics, culture, economics, any of those things. It's an interesting dynamic world we live in, where everything is very tightly interwoven and interconnected, and we should be able to just think about those things and talk about those things. And so, I'm never the type of person that will re immediately resort to being snarky or rude or anything like that. I mean, there are times where, if people approach me that way, I'm certainly very good at it. I can do it. I've been snarky and things like that. If someone is, approaches me that way, um, because, you've got to be able to hold your own, right? You don't want people to walk all over you, but I prefer not to have to interact that way.
Hmm, well said. I can't help but thinking as I'm hearing your stories too of just what a cool example you all are going to be to your Austin, to your kids, in the sense of, like, they're looking at their dad and their granddad, and they're able to say, as they're probably going to hear cultural messages about you need to believe in Jesus, to say, like, my dad and my granddad are amazing, loving men with hearts of gold who would do anything for me. They're very smart people. They're rational. They think deeply. They love deeply. They have a passion for life, a zeal for life, and they're just good men. And they're also not falling in line with this theology, with this mythological worldview. And I think it's one of the biggest impacts that I know I didn't have when I was growing up, but I love seeing it more and more in these stories of people that I interview. Of you're giving the next generation, yes, the information, hopefully, more about where this comparative mythology came from, but also just to say, I'm just a living example. And I don't know if you had this, but when I was growing up, Christian music was such a big deal. And there was this one, I think it was Newsboys. They had this song, "Shine," make them wonder what you got, make them wish that they were not on the outside looking in. Um, Meaning of Christianity and the church and your relationship with Christ. And it's like you realize that we actually can, in many ways, shine so much brighter. I mean, even just the simple paradigm of like, hey, can you forgive? Well, yeah, I can forgive, but I don't need blood to do it. I can just forgive. Okay, well, you're better than Yahweh. And it's like we're shining so much better than Christians ever could. And certainly a lot of people that I've interviewed would say they're shining more with peace. They have more peace about their lives, about the world, and just the humility to have admitted I didn't know everything, and I admit there was a lot of gaps, and I'm going to be honest with them. The humility it took to deconvert, and also the ability to go out and say, I want to love people, I want to do charity work, whatever, not because I have to or because I'm compelled to or out of gratitude for someone that did something for me 2,000 years ago or fear, but I just want to. Like, I just want to be a good person. And that it warms my heart, honestly. It's like puts a smile on my face to think the next generation can see that and say, even before we talk about the mythology stuff, there are good people who have just said, I don't take the mythology path. And people need that. And I know I didn't have anyone that I can think of. And I know that actually, I'll clarify that. I did have one uncle who the family poisoned the well. I had an uncle who was not a believer. He was pretty much clearly an atheist. And I remember growing up, everyone's kind of saying, he's on the fringe of our family. He's a bad guy. And now I see him as a bit of an unsung hero. I should probably try to interview him at some point, if he's up for it. But he stood up as this kind of atheist that he probably knew everyone's kind of talking about you and kind of talking smack about you behind your back. But that was like that when you grow up in a family where everybody's a Christian and everyone's raising their kids to be Christian, the one-off atheist is the outlier, and so we're going to kind of put him in that poison group. But I know I've asked you a lot of questions and we've talked about, but I do want to ask if you could just number one, of course, cast the first to Ricky. Anything we didn't talk about that you wanted to add for your story, but then also maybe any advice for someone who is going through it, either at the very beginning where they're just questioning, or they're kind of in that spot like you were, where they're like, yeah, I definitely don't believe it, but there's some issues if I go public, or just maybe they're okay with that, but they're just trying to start to heal. What advice would you give to someone in that beginning phase of it?
Well, yeah, you can't be afraid to question anything, I mean, just to go on any rabbit hole, on any avenue to find, what is truth. It is scary at first. I mean, I remember the first time learning, certain things that question my worldview. It's a little stressful, and then, but like, luckily, I'm able to, once you get some evidence and then chew over it for a short period of time, I'm able to pivot with that evidence. But what you can expect is it's gonna be a couple of years of stress. I mean, there's gonna be a lot of stress involved because you have to go in knowing everything's gonna change, like everything, and especially the relationship was the hard part of it because I knew that I'm gonna lose, like, friends aren't gonna want to be around me because I'm seen as dangerous or evil work or stuff like that. Family members are, my family did, like, they don't do, I wouldn't call it true shunning in the church. It's more like, shunning-ish. People wouldn't want to really be around me because I have different thoughts, and they'd probably be stressed out if I brought up anything that was problematic. Um, so going into that, that's going to be difficult with the family, and like, well, last year actually I was on Jonathan Pierce's channel two different times, once by myself and then once with Austin. We did an interview. I had a lot of people, Laestadians, reach out to me, whether it's through direct message or else phone calls and stuff like that. And it's sad to hear, like you just related, like with your uncle and stuff. Is there's these wonderful people I talk to, are loving, wonderful people that have been like pushed to the outside. Some of them have terrible stories to share. Some of them, thankfully, they have family that is still says they love them and want them around. But others have shared stories where they were written out of wills. Some other people told me that, well, my father said he'll never speak to me again. One has shared with me that she just told her, her father said he'll never speak to her again, but she was luckily he didn't hold on to that promise, because when he was near death, they had a good conversation. So when you hear stories like that, it's just heartbreaking, because it's like these people are worthy of love. They're beautiful people, and because of a religion, you see them as othered, and you don't want them around, or you're feeling comfortable around them, or stuff like that. So those type of things, trying to navigate those, is it's difficult and painful. I've had family members tell me that they see us as the elephant in the room, or it makes them uncomfortable being around us, and hopefully with time that will pass and stuff like that. And those times I'll take the opportunity to say, well, actually, that's one of my biggest criticisms of these high control religions, is that they other people like that. Like, I could sit there and visit you and be comfortable, but you're kind of watching me and looking at me as something different and things like that. And like, breaking through those walls of seeing othering people and stuff like that is just, it to me, like I said, it's just been so refreshing. It feels so nice to just see people as people. And I also, within that type of high control religion, I've shared some stories that were, like I said, I have a lot more crazy stories I could share, but also there have been a handful of people that have been really kind too. So I don't want to paint it all as negative. There's, three or four people that specifically, especially with my wife, that have been very kind to her. And even a couple weeks ago, one person from the church that she saw in public told her that, even though we don't believe the same anymore, I still love you. And that was great, because she had lost friends that don't really want to be around her, had nothing to do with her, or even have any contact with her. And to hear from a person or two that actually still loves her for who she is, like, that's been wonderful for her. It's good for a person's psyche to say, okay, not everybody sees me as this horrible person. I'm still lovable old me.
Mm, absolutely. It is amazing too how when you leave, like you said, the love bombing's there while you're there, but once you actually officially leave, they really do treat you like a traitor. And I don't want to compare apples to oranges, but I feel like, the way that Edward Snowden would have been looked at, when he double crossed, in many people's eyes, the CIA, you're looking at that and people are just like, this guy's an absolute traitor. And when you leave Christianity, it's like that. It's like you did an Edward Snowden to them, and they're
Mhm.
just going to hate you for it. And it's amazing the way that lands. But
Yeah, it's
what?
terrible. And what's been fascinating too is some people that have reached out to me there's actually a few people that have said that, they're still go to the church, but they don't really believe it, but they have different reasons of why they stay. And that's been fascinating to learn. And a lot of other people shared stories with me, with other people have, contacted them, because we kind of got an online community of people that are ex-Laestadians from all the different branches. Like I said, there's many different splits.
Hmm,
So there's, in this private Facebook group, there's people from all different walks of life from in the ex-Laestadian community. And so it's good, because we all can support each other and share stories and feel supported and stuff like that. But other people, the people that told me, well, I don't really believe the church, but I don't know what to do. Like, I don't know how to get out, because I'm gonna lose, everybody. And I have other people that have called me and talked to me, said, well, I left the church, and I've lost all my friends and stuff like that. And I also say, well, I'm here to support you. I had to help people help me as I journeyed out that were ex Laestadians, and now I've been trying to help other people as much as I can, make them feel supported and loved. And I'll check in with them to say, how are you doing? Some people say, well, my family is really dogmatic and they don't want anything to do with me. And I want them, when you see like the suicide rate and stuff like that of people that are in those environments where they can't authentically be themselves, especially with the homosexuality, things like that, it just breaks my heart, because it's like they need to feel like there's somebody that loves them and an advocate. So I check in with them and even send them a simple message to say, how you doing? Haven't talked to you for a while. Just want to make sure you're okay, things like that, because they lost everybody that they can communicate with openly. So, I'm
yeah.
gonna keep trying to do that and pay that forward.
Hmm. It's a great reminder, and the need to really rebuild community as much as we can, as quick as we can, because it definitely feels like it's amazing to me and we'll wrap up. I'll get to you, Austin, 1 second to wrap this up. But it's amazing to me that like the picture I described was my dad had died in January of 2019, and I deconverted later that year, end of September, early October of 2019. So I'm coming up on 4 years of my anniversary of my deconversion. But it was a really stark reminder to me, the idea of like, okay, your physical father died, you went to his funeral, you got a chance to mourn it, and now your heavenly father, arguably much more important in your worldview, because your earthly father is just a few years, your heavenly father is forever and ever and ever, much more bigger, much powerful. So you're now grieving the death of your heavenly father in a sense, even though you're saying it's not like a death because he's never been there, he's never been real. Emotionally, you're processing a death of a worldview. And so nobody would ever deprive you of the chance to mourn the loss of your own parents and say, what are you doing? Skip this funeral. This is stupid. I'd be like, no, I'm so sorry for your loss. And grieve it properly, grieve it well, grieve it deeply. Um, what can I do to help you? That kind of stuff. And they would appropriately let you heal. And then when you try to heal from your heavenly father's death, they're just like, screw you, and worse. And the idea of that is just, it's so offensive. It's truly offensive, but they can't do but anything but, because you're effectively saying he's dead to me, but he's also dead to you because he's never been there. And so the implications cause them this terror, and they say they have to respond by just basically being obnoxious to you, even though you need to grieve. They truly, the grieving process almost like it hits like a double whammy. You're grieving your own deconversion, your own worldview loss, and the loss of the community, of course, at the same time. But you're also grieving the fact that you're about to be intensely triggered and hammered and abused by the Christian community. So it's like you must have to go through a grief, as grieving a loss as you're being abused.
Mhm.
And that's a horrible place to heal, as you're literally facing abuse in your face. You need to kind of get away from it all, which is obviously speaking to the choir here. But Austin, I wanted to pass it back to you to wrap us up. What advice would you give to anybody who is just at the beginning phases of its falling apart? And how would you advise them, either in terms of going through that process or healing from religious trauma, if that's applicable?
Yeah. It's a tough one to answer, because everybody's um different in terms of how they react, in terms of what they need, um, and also what they have believed and what they've felt, in terms of their connection to their religion, their religious beliefs, their purported relationship with Jesus, their relationship with their faith community. And so that can be an extremely difficult thing. And, I definitely can't give catch-all advice. For myself, I think I was young enough. I was also independent enough, and I had plenty of friends and other things I was concerned about outside of church, to where, I didn't really care that much about what I was losing, except for disappointing like my immediate family members. I didn't want my parents to be hurt. That's why I didn't say anything for a while, because I knew they would be upset. You don't want to cause that type of discomfort, but you also have to be yourself, and be who you are. It's such an important thing, and no matter what, I really think for most people, um you can't really be happy unless you can be who you are, even if you want to live a certain way because it's going to make other people happy. If I just stay in this community, I'll just coast through it and it'll make my life easier, but you'll never feel good about yourself. You'll never feel good inside. You might be depressed or angry, or just not feeling right. So sometimes you have to just rip the band-aid off, be yourself, and then deal with it one step at a time. For me, again, I think what I really lost was a lot of baggage, unnecessary things that were holding me back. So it was kind of relieving to let that go. I didn't want really anything to do with it. Besides just hurting some of my immediate family members. Because my parents obviously cared and loved me and things like that. Some of my other family members, I didn't care so much if I didn't have a relationship with them anymore, because a lot of them are frankly pretty rude and condescending, um, uh, people who kind of would talk down to me or things like that, or make a lot of things about my age. I'm almost 30 now. I'm no closer to being a theist than when I initially deconverted. If anything, I know so much more than I did even when I was 20. That the likelihood of that ever occurring again is pretty much zero. I highly doubt we're gonna find this mind-blowing proof of Christianity anytime. If anything, it's only gotten more and more defeated the more that we learn about the universe. So a lot of those things like, oh well, you're only 21, or you're a kid, or you're blah, 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 without even engaging things that I have to say. That was one thing that always really bothered me. And I've called people out before and just said, like, you should be ashamed of yourself. Like, I've worked hard to get where I am. And to just be so dismissive. Like, I wouldn't do that to you. I could be, oh, I went to graduate school. Like, I have a graduate degree. Like, I worked as a professor. Like, what do you know? I'm not going to talk to you. I would never do that to somebody, right? I could pull, now I'm at the point of my life where I could pull credentials all day long and be like, I've done this thing, I've done that thing. But I would still just have a friendly discussion with somebody if they wanted to talk to me, and not do that type of thing. So people who do those types of things, who were in my life before, whether you're a family member or a church member, anything like that, um it doesn't feel like you're losing much if that's the way that people are going to behave to you. um you know but again, in terms of the advice, it's really difficult to say, but I would just say, be yourself. Try to be kind, be honest. Always try to do the right thing, even though it's hard, and sometimes we don't know what it is. We don't know what the right thing is. Just try to be the best person that you can be. Try to live morally and act um, in a way such that you're thinking about the consequences of your actions, um, and how the things that you do impact the world and the people around you. And just try to do the best that you can. You mentioned being an example and shining for people, and that's something that I think we really need to be mindful of and be good at, because there's no better counter example to all of these gloom and doom um, prophecies that people from church would say are going to happen when you leave the church. Oh, your life is going to be miserable. This or that is going to happen. There's no better counterexample than living a good life and being a good person, to show that you're wrong. If we're not part of this church anymore, it does not mean that our life is going to be bad. It does not mean that we're going to be unhappy. It does not mean that we're going to be bad people, or alcoholics, or drug abusers, or this, that, or the other, any type of thing. Live and lead by example, and people see that, wow, these people are happier than ever. Wow, they're living their dreams, right? By being able to let go of those things that held me back, I was able to be the person that I am and live out my dreams, right? I wanted to work in science. I wanted to be an educator. I wanted to be a researcher, and I've been able to do all of those things by just being who I am and being curious, and not having to worry about that type of thing. And life is hard, right? It's hard. We don't always know the right thing to do, and sometimes it can be hard to find the right answer, or um, make the best choice. But the point is to try, and to try your best, and think about what it means to be a good person, and to live a good life, and to do the right types of things. So, um, if you're leaving Christianity, study moral philosophy, think about it. It's very important. When you come out of religions, a lot of times you're used to that kind of rule-based morality, that you can't do this, that, or that thing, or God wants you to do this, that, and the other thing. When you don't have that, you have to rebuild from the ground up. You have to think about what it means to be moral, and how do we go about living a moral life, and things like that. And I really think that leading by example is a good way to show people that it's okay to not have a theological underpinning to the way that you live your life and interact with other human beings.
Well said.
Well, yeah, well said.
I love it. Love it. Well, I appreciate you both. Thank you so much. You're clearly a dynamic duo and tag team champions. I really appreciate you both sharing your story. It's it sounds like it's been an interesting journey in many ways, but I'm so glad. Just from an outsider's perspective, I'm so glad that you all have been able to find camaraderie amongst each other, and at least some of your family. I hope it continues and expands to the family that's not willing to open their minds yet. But you all are a great example. You've been a great example to me. I think our community is going to really appreciate hearing from you. And I'll also, by the way, have the links to Ricky, to your interviews on Jonathan Pierce's channel, A Tippling Philosopher, so people can go check out more of those if they want to. And just thank you both. We really appreciate your stories and your insights. This is great. And definitely look forward to hearing from you all again. I'll just wrap up by saying we've been speaking with Ricky Johnson and Austin Johnson. Gentlemen, thank you so much. It's great to get to know you. Great to hear your story. Thank you so very much.
Yeah, thank you. Really enjoyed it.
Me
Yeah,
too.
thanks for having us.
Absolutely. Have a great day. Thank you so much.